All right, I see us in OBS. That's a good sign. That's a good sign. Good. We didn't figure this out at the beginning. Is it evening for you or is it afternoon for you?
I don't know. It's gone dark,
Right,
so
I saw
it's
that.
okay if you say evening now,
Okay.
I guess,
All
right?
right. But the sunset is so early now. It's depressing,
I just hate this kind of winter time, right? I
right?
mean, I'd rather stay on summertime all
Me
year
too.
round.
Me too. Yeah, I mean, we switched back a couple weeks ago, and there's always these people who argue about, oh, we should go on summertime or we should go on regular time all the time. I'm like, no, no, you don't live where I live because when I see my phone tell me sunsets at 4:32 or whatever, I'm like, no, I'd rather have sun at night, thank you.
I'm with you. It's brutal.
Awesome. Well, good evening, Mr. Weber. How are you, sir?
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. We've had a very animated pre-show, and for my own intellectual edification, that was a lot of fun. I hope we're a little compressed here today, but we'll hopefully get to something nearly as interesting. Although I don't know, we try to avoid some of those topics on this show that we can talk about when we're not recording, but that's okay. That's okay. We'll deal with it. But so for people who somehow aren't familiar with you, what's your origin story? How did you get into this weird world known as tech? And we won't talk about how our paths cross because that's too incriminating.
Uh, it is. I mean, my origin story. I liked computers when I was little. So I was born at a time when the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, had this mission to educate the whole of the UK about these things called microcomputers. And so they built microcomputers. They built the BBC microcomputers and they put them in schools around the UK. And we were shown how to use them. And rather remarkably, the first application I ever used was a database which recorded all the kids in my class and whether we had watches or not. And it allowed us to play a little guessing game where you told it some information about yourself and it would guess whether you were Billy or Jimmy or Kevin or Frida or whatever. And I was hooked. And it was also around the time where there was the Sinclair ZX Spectrum or Timex 2000 as it was in the US. A little microcomputer plugs into your TV via the aerial socket, 16 or 48K of RAM, 8 colors, right? I mean, we're talking huge color palette.
Eight.
But critically, it was the first computer that you could buy for under 100 quid. And so it kind of put computing, all of you folks in the US with you, oh yes, my first computer was a $3,000 Apple, blah de blah. No, I come from the project. I come from a council estate in the UK. We can't afford that, but we could afford 100 quid. So family scrimped and saved, granny, mum, dad, all that, and they bought me one of these computers for Christmas, this ZX Spectrum, and it blew me away. My friend round the corner had one, and the fact that you could type things and make it do things, or you could load games from a cassette recorder, just like astonished, 7-year-old me. And the game that we love playing, you can't say it on live Twitch anymore, but it was called Penetrator. And it was wonderful. It was like a knockoff of Scramble, the old arcade game, but it was called Penetrator. And that's terribly rude now, but we were 7 and we didn't know any better. So we consistently played Penetrator and got very good at playing Penetrator. And I'm going to keep saying that word until you lose your composure, aren't I? But that hooked me. And then throughout my childhood, I guess like many of us, then it's onto a fairly familiar bent, isn't it? I was hooked. I enjoyed the kind of typing in listings from library books that I'd borrow and learning quirky Sinclair Basic that way. And then as I grew up a little bit, I started repairing hardware for a local computer shop, and they asked me to build a database again for the local pigeon racing club. So
I'm
again,
sorry,
yeah, I
pigeon
know, right?
racing? Pigeon racing.
It's a thing, man.
You
Like
have the
Google it. Yeah.
weirdest sports in your country.
It. I mean, look, pigeons are amazing that you can like take them somewhere random and they fly home.
Sure,
But the fact
but
that like
racing
thousands
them.
of people would
Hmm.
time that,
Hmm.
when they're
Hmm.
pigeon. But anyway, so it turns out that I learned something that day that at first bubble sorting on a 3-inch disc is fast, and then over time they keep like telling you that the software is too slow, and you have no
Hmm.
idea why because you've got like a perfectly reasonable algorithm called bubble sort running on a 3-inch Amstrad CPC disc, and it's slowed down over time. I've not learned much since then, to be honest, even though I now work at a database company. Bubble sort's great. It's what we build the whole company on, right?
I,
It's
I'm, I'm,
not,
I'm,
it's not, oh God, I hope Emil's not watching.
I mean, I don't think anybody really watches. It's probably fine. This is just an excuse for me to hang out with my friends and
Uh,
consider it work in this weird pandemic world where
you
we're
get paid for this, right? This is fine. I'm getting paid
yeah,
for this too. It's
I know.
fine. We're
See,
all good.
it all works out. It all works out. Now I'm surprised Doctor Who didn't figure into that in some way, shape, or form.
It didn't. It didn't. So of course, I'm a Brit. I mean, cup of mug of tea right here, ready for the interview. All of the cliches are there, and I watched all of that stuff throughout my childhood. But it didn't really play a big part in the kind of tech until I landed at Neo4j. And it turned out that graphs are this really interesting structure. They're really flexible. You can model lots of things, which is quite difficult to model. For example, in the relational world. And I
Mhm.
know that the relational researchers and diehards will tell you that you can model anything in relational. Yes, strictly that's only true if you're thinking about joins as being links between entities. But in an implementation world, in a physical database that you might actually use, it's really hard to kind of go forwards and backwards in time.
Right.
And it's really hard to describe, well, yes, this is the doctor, but so is Jodie Whittaker and so is Peter Capaldi. And it's like, how do I structure that in tables? And so when I came to Neo4j, they're really heavy on the matrix, hence the Neo thing, right? So there's kind of two warring clans at Neo. I mean, obviously the Matrix folks won because they got the name,
Right.
right?
Right.
They got the Neo bit. So Emil and co won that. But when I arrived, it's like, well, actually, I want a really more interesting data set, right? And you remember back in the day when our paths originally crossed, or shortly after our paths originally crossed, looking for something that would be forwards and backwards in
Right.
time and had many dimensions of complexity, incorporating the real world, incorporating this vast fantasy world, which could go forwards and backwards in time. And that was big. And the Doctor Who data set's big. It's been going since 1963. And so the idea was there, you could bring all of this together, the characters, the actors, the sets, the producers, the directors, the locations, all of this stuff, and then merge that in with this fantasy world of planets and time travel and aliens and Daleks and all this stuff, and then start to ask queries about it to demonstrate just how querying in n dimensions, tell me the bad guy that the Doctor fought most often when they were filming in a quarry in Wales between 1982 and 1987, where the baddies came from a particular part of the galaxy. Like, I don't know how many dimensions that was, but several.
Right.
And it just showing how natural that was to express as a graph problem. Now, the meta problem we then had, and I think Martin Thompson coined this very well, it's like Neo4j is really interesting, but you have to have a really high threshold for sci-fi before you can start learning graphs. I think that was the downside of this. Like in my world, it was amazing because I understood the domain, but I used to teach people Neo4j, and then I realized I'm spending the first hour, particularly in the US, where Doctor Who isn't in your bloodstream, spending the first hour or two just talking about the show and
Right.
not teaching any stuff about graph databases. So I think in a way, the matrix stuff probably has more utility. I hope Emerald's not watching this now. That's really me
I
eating
mean,
humble.
it's possible that Doctor Who actually was created to help you teach graph theory. Did you ever think of it that way?
I mean, that would just be genius, wouldn't it? That would be the BBC planting the seed with
Hmm.
the old BBC microcomputer.
Right.
Somehow, the unseen hand guiding my whole career towards this very moment.
Playing the long game.
Wouldn't put it past them.
No.
They are basically like the socialist broadcasting organization,
Right. Right. I mean,
nefarious.
maybe if you did some examples with Ted Lasso for your U.S. audiences, maybe that would work. But see, I got to bring Lasso into every show.
Oh,
It's
well,
in my
you are native
contract now.
weight. And it has been noted, and I'll remove the glasses for this because I look less psychotic, more psychotic without them. It has been noted that I am software's answer to Roy Kent. Ugh.
Ooh. Ooh.
I am
Nice.
angry. I do
Okay.
grunt. I
Okay.
don't take fools. I don't suffer fools gladly.
Whistle.
Um,
Whistle.
uh, uh,
Yeah,
uh. It works, right? It
yeah, it's
works.
about right. That works. That works.
But
That's
no, look, I love how both Americans and Brits think they own Right Kent, right? I
mm,
love that very. Like, all my American folks at Neo4j are watching it, and we all think it's hilarious. All the Brits are watching. We think, but both sides think they own it. It's definitely we own it because it's about soccer in the Premier League and the lower leagues. But you folks think you own it because it's like this friendly mustache guy from like the friendly middle
right.
states that
Right.
bumbles into the big smoke. It's wonderful, right? And I think not only is it well written and enjoyable and so on, but I think it's got some really interesting kind of metaphor. Now, look, everyone
Mm,
claims to own Ted Lasso, right? In
mhm.
the same way that everyone claims that they own Frank Herbert,
Sure.
right? But there's some wonderful metaphors there for software teams, right? The kind of the team themselves. They are when you first meet them, there is the 10x or 100x programmer. That's Jamie Tart. and he is clearly brilliant. Right.
Hmm.
And there is the jaded old Nate Strutter character, right, who clearly was brilliant at some point when he played at Chelsea, right, who's now resentful.
Hmm.
But, the Jamie Tart character, you can see the analog of the 10X programmer who's
Right.
steaming in there, wants to do the job, wants to do really well, but perhaps inadvertently leaves a trail of destruction in their wake. And then as the team evolves and you lose the 10X program and everyone else bonds, it turns out that they can just about put together a football project. And you've seen that on software projects,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Where you've got a team of people where they can sort of lose, they're good people, but where they can sort of lose the ego and work as a team, it's amazingly productive. And I think the redemption line there is when the kind of 10X programmer figures out how to massively deploy the 10X, grows some empathy, deploys the 10X skill in a way that works with the
Right.
rest of the team
Right.
rather than against it, including that wonderful moment where they give him the signal to
Yes.
start being that
Yes.
10X
Be that guy
programmer
again.
again. And he reverts and, completely
Apologize
takes
for
the
the
team in
fruity
another
sign
direction.
language.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Of course, that's why it's definitely an American show, because we wouldn't have done that.
Sure.
For in the purposes of for international relations, I'll remind you, it's that in British English. Apparently, you know the story for that.
I don't know that I do. That's
No, get out of it. So I don't know if this is true, but I desperately want it to be true.
okay.
So the Brits used to be like the world superpower, and
Yes.
one of the other powers that would always be resentful about that is the French, our old enemy or frenemy, I guess. And it turns out that one of the reasons we're a superpower is because we'd mastered the longbow, which means I can murder French people from a very long way away. But to draw a longbow, you need those two fingers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So apparently, when the French would capture British archers, they would take those two fingers. But the British archers, to show that they were going to murder you now, they would give you that before they then gave you that. That's apparently the story. I don't know. Like, it's one of these like folklore things. We've got plenty of those in software as well, right?
See, that makes me think of one of my favorite lines from season 2 is "Let's invade France."
It's never far from our minds, is it?
No, no. Why should it be?
After so many years, of course.
See, I think one of my favorite lines about Ted Lasso was Sudeikis was on, I think it was Saturday Night Live, and he said he was really surprised by the success of Ted Lasso because it combines two things that Americans hate: soccer and kindness. And I thought, yeah, that's probably not too far off. But yeah, I think it would be an interesting. I hadn't thought of sort of that software analogy piece to it, and I am curious how many people are kind of baffled by the soccer aspects of Lasso and are just more focused on the humor and the acting and the writing. But I think it's fantastic, and I'm delighted that it exists. And I've already watched season 2 again with my family in the last week or two, so it doesn't take us long to get back through it. But
No,
anyway,
no, and it is right. I think the it's a comedy show, right?
yeah,
It's not a life lesson as such. But that idea that empathetic leadership gets the best out of
yeah,
people, I think that is growing in our industry, but it's not
hmm,
mainstream yet, right? We still look for, we still have software leaders who are kind of old school in terms of like, have you done this task yet?
right,
And on the one hand, they will have a list of leadership principles that they would tell you that they run their lives by, and then if you actually looked at the list and tick the ones that you've seen in the last 6 months, it's a small subset, right?
right,
So we haven't yet reached that kind of Lasso beard axis of software project management as in the industry as a whole, but it's improving, right? In our
yeah,
professional lifetimes, right? uh, we had just the most awful kind of locker room style software development mentality, and where we are now, it's far more inclusive.
yeah,
We're not excellent yet, but
no,
we're improving to the point where we have people from different backgrounds doing all levels of software development, from entry level through to leadership positions and so on. We're including people of color. We're including the vast people from the vast array of gender spectrum. We're including people who are neurodiverse. We're including many more kinds of human than we ever used to. When it used to be just blokes like you and me,
right,
right? Kind of very, very boys club. And the industry's better for it.
yes, one hundred
And I
percent,
think one of the things that we do miss as an industry still on our our journey towards being diverse and better is we still miss out on socioeconomic diversity, because that pulls in structural inequalities that are hard to root out of even modern decent societies. I think if we
right,
can crack that nut, then our kind of Lasso beard axis kicks in, and we would start to just develop just wonderful teams where it'd be lovely to, it would be lovely if all teams were boringly nice and boringly
right,
productive. And
right.
I think that's one way of getting closer to that state.
Oh, that's a great phrase. I like that. Boringly nice. That's yeah, that's something we should strive for. Yeah, it's always frustrated me because you would think of any industry, the meritocracy should be so much easier to see in software because either you can do it or you can't, and it shouldn't matter anything beyond what you slap down with the keys. And I think there's still a little too much of this arrogance around how you got into industry. And well, wait, what do you mean you didn't go to a traditional computer science program? Well, traditional computer science programs have basically been around in our lifetime. I mean, our professional lifetime, I
Yeah, yeah.
should say, not even just our years on this planet. It wouldn't even go back that far. And I think people need to get a little less, I don't know, high and mighty about that and just be more, well, do you have that thinking pattern? Do you like the problem solving? Do you like the tinkering? The creativity aspect of it? And if you do, awesome. Come on in. The weather's great.
Don't forget though the structural inequality there,
Yeah,
right? So you say it shouldn't matter just what we slap down at the keyboard, and that would be fine if we were all given the same kind of starting points, right? For
right.
some folks who would be given investment, phenomenal contributors to our
Hmm.
community, the initial barriers to get there are so high, right? They can't get to a computer. They can't afford to take time off
Right.
from their 1 or 2 or 3 jobs they're working to do a bit of study so that they could do that, right? So even
Hmm.
that statement, which on the surface seems very fair and meritocracy,
Right.
you scrape a little more and it's like, hang on. I think that's a privilege that you and I have, that we were brought up
Sure.
perhaps in a system where we could study well, and my parents encouraged me to study and play on that bloody computer, as they would say.
Right.
But for some folks, it's not possible. And I think being wise to that would strengthen us again. I think we would get some of these folks who've got these creative, wonderful minds
Hmm.
into our industry and make the industry better. If somehow we could dismantle that and make the on ramp as easy for them as it perhaps
Right.
it was for folks like you and I.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, so many people that I know in our industry sort of grew up on computers, and a lot of it was just luck. That I think back to my experience and just happened to have somebody in my circle who was into computers, and so my parents bought one, and
Yeah.
I tinkered on it from the age of, I don't know, 8 or something, and so you don't even think twice about that. And it is a fascinating question, like how do we get that spread more widely so that other people have that exposure, and then the ability to either go, yeah, this isn't for me, or oh wow, this is really cool, and graph theory, you say, and I think, to your point, we would be better off as an industry by having those more diverse viewpoints and diverse perspectives. It would make the team stronger, and I just, how do we get that to happen?
Well, there are some technocratic things that are happening, right? So, I still have a fondness for the BBC microcomputer of, the 1980s. But the descendant of the BBC is Raspberry Pi, right?
Hmm.
So it's ARM, or Advanced RISC Machines as we know them, and that community are direct descendants of Acorn, the folks that
Yeah.
manufactured the BBC and the Archimedes and so on. And so, their model with the Raspberry Pi is to get super low cost computing into people's hands. Now, I don't know if that's enough.
Hmm.
When I had my I didn't have a BBC. When my school had a BBC computer, it was 400 quid in 1980s dollars. That's like $1,000 or
Right.
something, right? In modern dollars, it might be more. It might be closer
Sure.
to $2,000. That's ridiculous. But they also had a program of education which anyone could get into cheaply.
Right.
Now, I don't know if the modern equivalent are, it's like Khan Academy or Udemy or whatever that will get you going, but it was orchestrated in a way where it was no effort. It was like going to school. It was fed to you
Hmm.
as everything else was at school, and you just learned it. And that if we wanted to help people, if coding is the future, as I keep hearing various governments tell us, I don't think they're investing enough in it, both on
Right.
your side of the water and on mine.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, software is eating the world. I don't think there's really any argument around that. And yet we don't seem to be making some of those investments in that next generation of developers to help this be more than just those of us who happen to be, win that genetic lottery of being born in the right
Yeah.
place at the right time to the right parents. So how do we make that more widespread and make some of those investments?
And then on top of that, of course, data is eating software, is eating the world, right? So
Right.
there's a new world now where not only do you need to be somewhat software literate, but you need to be data literate, or right at the moment, statistically literate,
Hmm.
in order to really progress with kind of modern systems. And I think that is a double challenge, right? Because my stats is rusty, haven't done any since university. And I think that there is a challenge to unify the kind of statistically minded machine learning folks who produce software. And this is not to denigrate them, but their Python scripts are horrible. And they do
Mm,
some amazing things with those Python scripts, but there's scope for improvement. And then folks like me who could perhaps write a slightly better Python script, but we're missing the kind of statistical knowledge that we could use to bring to bear to really get stuck into some of those problems and make it, kind of the infrastructural part of it better, so we can get more value from it. And I think if there's a community of people that could knit those two together, the kind of statistical minded computer scientists or
sure,
the computationally minded statisticians, that's a winning formula for the near future, isn't it?
sure. That's funny. That brings us something. I was watching some American football last night, and the app I was using to watch it basically said, "Hey, do you want to share your data with the NFL?" And I'm like, "No, no, I do not." I wonder, what are your thoughts on that as someone who comes from the database side of the world? Do you think most people have any clue just how many fingerprints they leave, little bits of debris all around, and this very rich sort of picture companies have of us now?
I don't think folks do, right? I mean, members of so in the UK, by the way, we're not half so worried about personal privacy as you folks. A big cultural gulf there.
Mm,
We're on CCTV all the time. We
sure.
don't care because we're boring. We don't have any, kind of like, any of this sense of personal liberty or whatever. However, having said that, my family members who are not very technically savvy, many of them, they're quite surprised when they will go on an e-commerce site and look at something, a coat or a pair of shoes or what have you, and then they will keep getting adverts for that coat or pair of shoes, and to them it's
Right.
magic. Right, it's like,
Right.
whoa, these adverts for that shoes that I really must like keep following me around Facebook and Google and all that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's just the way the internet works. And they're kind of like amazed at it, but they're
Sure.
not bothered, right? They're not bothered that kind of vast catalog about their preferences is being built up. So I think in some parts of the world it happens and people aren't too fussed, right? And
Sure.
and the big tech companies, they mine that, right? Disgracefully in some cases. In the US, you guys are a little bit more, let's say, excitable about such things. And I'm sure that there are a few folks watching this Twitch stream through their VPN with a
Throwing that tea away, man. That's
absolutely the tinfoil hat on and all that stuff, right? But I think you folks are a bit more sophisticated, to be honest,
mm,
about this stuff, and I think you are more aware of your digital rights and the kind of the rights that you have over the privacy and protection of your own data.
sure.
Having said that, it's just so convenient to be sloppy with your data, right?
Yeah.
It just one click to check out rather than type in my name and remember the password from one password again and all that stuff. Oh, you've got my cookie, bam, off you go. And that one key, that cookie is a key into a universe of knowledge. For what it's worth, an incomplete universe, which is kind of risky, but it's a
Hmm.
key to a universe of knowledge about me, which is the payback for me is convenience.
Right.
But the payback for the aggregate data for like the fangs of this world
Hmm.
is that they know so much about us and they
Billions and
use that
billions of
in ways.
dollars.
Yeah, well, not only monetizing, right? I think they can monetize, sure, but for example, in the world of Facebook, they can offer influence, very very
Right.
directed influence. So if you want to market to my particular demographic and swing my vote one way or another, you can pay
Right.
Facebook to do that, and it's very clever. It's very
Right.
graph theoretical, so graph theory for good or for bad, and we don't know that. I think what's important about that is, as a citizen, I don't necessarily want to take that on myself. I don't
Right.
necessarily want to take on, for example, wiring regulations so that I don't get a shock from my
Right.
superior 240 volts main system. See that? See what I did there? Yeah.
I did. I did. Yep. Yep.
Because someone else regulates for that, mate. And
Hmm.
so what I'd really like is for other people, governments who are technically savvy, I know such thing doesn't yet exist, but may they exist in the future, to also start to regulate
Right.
about, hey, look, we regulate for seatbelts in cars and data that Facebook can hold and wiring standards and all that
Right.
stuff, just as part of the normal safety net of being a citizen. And right now it's the Wild West.
Yes.
And if I was one of the big data companies, I would be hoovering in
Of
that data
course.
now and I'd be running my ML models on it now,
Yeah.
because a decade from now it's going to
It's
be
going to change.
restricted.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that surveillance capital, and one of the things that comes up a lot when we talk about technology, especially where that intersection with the legal system, technology moves a lot faster than the legal system. It's like the effort underway right now to say, well, all phones should use USB-C for charging because that'd be more convenient. okay, I understand that argument, but the reality is what happens in 3 years when there's a superior technology, but the restriction still says I have to use USB-C. That's a problem
Yep,
too, and I don't know that you and I
absolutely.
are going to be able to solve that in the next 30 seconds.
I don't think so, mate. I think that, we live in interesting times. I
We
think
do. We do.
that something that we should realize in our community is that we're toolsmiths. Most of us are kind of regular people, right? We build tools that other people use, and those tools can be built for put to good uses, positive uses. They can put to less positive uses, but it's on us, right? We have to make that choice every day. And I'm not saying that, like, you shouldn't build tools and sell them to the military, right? That's your call, that's my call, whatever. But we have to be more aware of the uses that our tools are
Yeah.
being put to, because we're not in a moral vacuum.
Right.
And sometimes we have to think, am I doing what's right for me today, my moral frame of reference?
Mm-hmm. That's a great
And
point.
then we have to get to work and write loads of code anyway.
Well, that's right. That's right. And I know you have places to be, so we'll end here. And I'll just say I'm going to have Beth reach out because we need to have a longer conversation. You and I spent so much time having the pre-show that we lost some of our time for the real show, but that's okay because I miss you. So I know we'll find some time in
We
22
will.
to hang out and have a lengthier conversation. But I do appreciate your time and have a good evening since I know
Thank
it's
you. I
it's your
think
time.
it's safe to call it evening now. It's nearly
I
5
think
p.m.,
so.
right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, because it's
yeah, it's
yeah,
safe.
yeah, it's like mid-afternoon. Not even it's late morning for me, I guess would be the appropriate terminology, I guess. I don't know. Time has no meaning in a pandemic, but anyway. Well, thank you for hanging out with me on this abbreviated show. I
Pleasure.
appreciate it. I'll be
Lovely
back
to see
next
you.
week with a VMware colleague, which will be always fascinating. But we'll get you on again, Jim. Thank you very much.
Awesome, mate. And I hope our paths cross again soon if you can let me get one graph pun in at the end.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Cheers, mate.